The sergeant's laughter cut through the chaos as she lifted the dust-covered launcher. In the middle of a brutal assault, with communications down and smart weapons failing, they mocked her for even trying. The relic was museum junk, they said. Outdated, useless. She ignored them, dropping to one knee as enemy tanks advanced. One quick adjustment to the firing mechanism, one clean shot across the valley. What happened next silenced everyone on that ridge. Sometimes the oldest weapons prove most deadly in the right hands. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more untold military moments that changed everything. Tech specialist Zyra Koslov moved with practiced precision through the dim light of the armory's back corner. Unlike the sterile, blue-lit maintenance bays where other techs worked on AI-guided systems, her workspace felt like a relic itself, cramped, dusty, with flickering fluorescence that hummed in protest. The shelves around her held weapons considered obsolete in an age of quantum targeting and neural-guided munitions. But to Zyra, each piece was a masterwork of engineering, a testament to the ingenuity that existed long before computers controlled everything on the battlefield. "Good morning, old friend," she whispered, uncovering an M57 Fulcrum launcher. The Vietnam-era weapon was heavy, mechanical, and considered hopelessly outdated. She ran her fingers along its weathered surface, feeling the small imperfections that told stories of battles long past. While the newest weapons in the armory required diagnostic tablets and software updates, this one just needed understanding, something Zyra had in abundance. As she disassembled the firing mechanism, her mind drifted to her grandfather's workshop. She was 8, watching his weathered hands restore a bolt-action rifle for the military museum he curated. The smell of gun oil and metal polish filled the small room as winter light filtered through frosted windows. "Remember, Zyra," he'd said, voice like gravel worn smooth by time, "when everything else fails, understanding the mechanics means you're never truly helpless. Technology changes, but physics remains constant." She'd nodded, absorbing his words as she absorbed everything else he taught her, with quiet intensity and perfect recall. Those lessons had shaped her, driven her to enlist despite her grandfather's concerns about how the military had changed, become dependent on systems that could fail in ways no human could quickly fix. The memory faded as Boots approached, the confident stride immediately recognizable. The museum curator hard at work. Sergeant Eldon Merrick leaned against a shelf, arms crossed over his chest. His voice carried to the other techs nearby, ensuring an audience for his regular mockery. "Keeping our antiques shiny? Better hope the enemy brings a time machine." Laughter rippled through the armory. Zyra didn't look up, just continued her methodical work on the launcher's trigger assembly. She'd learned long ago that responding only encouraged him. Besides, her fingers were currently buried in the delicate inner workings of a weapon that could still kill just as effectively as it had 50 years ago, if properly maintained. "We've got a briefing in 10 for Operation Thunderclap." Merrick pushed off from the shelf. "Try not to get dust on the real equipment when you join us." He left, trailed by a few subordinates who glanced back at Zyra with expressions ranging from amusement to mild pity. None of them understood what she was doing or why it mattered. To them, she was just the odd tech who preferred mechanical relics to the sleek digital systems that had revolutionized warfare. Zyra completed the maintenance, performing 3 function checks before returning the weapon to its case. As an afterthought, she slipped a small tube of specialized lubricant into her pocket. The launcher had a tendency to jam in certain weather conditions, something she'd noticed during her studies of after-action reports from decades ago, reports no one else bothered to read anymore. The base commanders stood before holographic terrain maps in the briefing room, outlining Operation Thunderclap with sweeping gestures that carried the confidence of superior technology. The 3-dimensional rendering of the battlefield shifted as he spoke, highlighting approach vectors, drone deployment zones, and communication relay points. "Our technological superiority gives us the edge," he concluded after 20 minutes of detailed tactical planning. "The enemy has nothing that can counter our integrated battlefield awareness. Any questions?" Zyra raised her hand after a moment of silence. Several heads turned, surprised. She rarely spoke during briefings. "Sir, what about electromagnetic countermeasures? If the enemy deploys signal jammers or EMP devices, how do we maintain operational capability?" The commander's expression shifted subtly, somewhere between annoyance and dismissal. That's why we have redundant systems specialists, triple secured frequency hopping and quantum encryption. Our countermeasures have countermeasures. Next question. But there were no other questions. The room accepted his answer without concern, confident in the infallibility of their advanced systems. Zahra lowered her hand, knowing better than to press the issue. She'd raised the same concern before previous operations, and the response was always the same. Technology would protect them. Technology would ensure victory. Assignment tablets were distributed, officers tapping through their mission parameters with practiced efficiency. Zahra wasn't surprised to find herself relegated to rear logistics, again. Her technical skills were considered valuable enough to keep her deployed, but not forward where the real action would happen. As the briefing dispersed, she lingered, watching tactical officers excitedly discussing drone deployment patterns and automated response protocols. No one mentioned backup plans. No one considered what might happen if the technology failed. The possibility seemed too remote to warrant consideration. Back at her quarters, Zahra methodically packed her standard kit: uniform, rations, medical supplies, personal items. She checked each piece twice, a habit her grandfather had instilled in her. "Preparation prevents problems," he would say, his hands moving through his own checklist with ritual precision. She hesitated when her packing was complete, considering the feeling that had been growing since the briefing. Against regulations, she returned to the armory, using her maintenance access to enter quietly during shift change. The M57 launcher sat where she'd left it, cleaned and functional. After a quick glance around, she retrieved it and carefully wrapped it in her gear. "Better to have and not need," she whispered, securing the launcher in her pack. Morning arrived with the controlled chaos of pre-operation movement. Transport vehicles rumbled across the base, soldiers performed last equipment checks, and communication officers confirmed signal integrity with command. Zahra loaded her gear, including her unauthorized addition, onto the logistics transport without drawing attention. As a tech specialist, she had some leeway in carrying additional equipment, though anyone who actually checked would question her choice. No one checked. No one ever did. Her position was too insignificant, her duties too peripheral to warrant scrutiny. The invisibility that had frustrated her career advancement now served as perfect cover. The convoy departed the base under clear skies, dust billowing behind the armored vehicles as they moved toward their objective. Zahra sat in the logistics transport, surrounded by supply crates and spare parts for the systems she was expected to help maintain. Around her, other support personnel chatted or checked their tablets for updates from the forward units. She remained silent, one hand resting on her pack, feeling the outline of the launcher through the fabric. Something in her gut told her this operation would be different. The enemy had been adapting, learning, evolving their tactics with each encounter. Military intelligence dismissed concerns, citing the technological gap that still existed between forces. But Zahra knew from history that necessity bred innovation, and disadvantage could spark desperate creativity. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the designated logistics position, a ridge overlooking the valley where the main assault would take place. Forward units had already deployed, establishing a perimeter and launching reconnaissance drones to verify intel before the main force engaged. Everything proceeded according to plan, a choreographed display of modern military precision. Zahra established her maintenance station, setting up diagnostic equipment and spare modules for quick repairs if needed. From her position, she could see the command post where officers coordinated the operation, their screens glowing with real-time data from the battlefield network. Sergeant Merrick's squad was among the forward units tasked with securing the ridge once the drone strikes had softened enemy positions. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Too perfectly, Zahra thought, glancing at her pack where the launcher waited. She hoped she was wrong, that her precaution would prove unnecessary. But as the operation moved into its active phase, she kept the pack within arm's reach, just in case. The operation was failing. Zahra crouched at her logistics station as frantic reports flooded in, crackling through communication systems that had been perfectly functional just moments before. She watched the command screens flicker and distort, tactical data corrupting before officers could respond. Enemy forces had deployed some kind of signal disruptor, something their intelligence had failed to anticipate. The effects were immediate and devastating. Drones plummeted from the sky like dead birds, their guidance systems scrambled. Smart munitions veered off course or failed to arm, wasting precious ordnance. Communications fragmented into static, isolating units from coordinated response. The carefully planned operation was unraveling in minutes. Through her binoculars, Zahra watched their forward units retreating to the ridge in disarray, taking fire from positions that should have been neutralized by the initial drone strikes. Then something caught her eye, movement in the valley below where there should have been none. An enemy armored column had appeared, advancing steadily toward their position, a flanking maneuver that their disabled surveillance systems had completely missed. Sergeant Merrick shouted contradictory orders as his squad fell back to the ridge, his confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Without communications, without functional weapons systems, the unit was exposed and vulnerable. Standard protocols required technological solutions that were no longer available. Zahra moved toward her pack where the M57 was stored, calculation replacing concern in her mind. The enemy tanks would reach optimal firing position in less than 5 minutes. Their own anti-armor capabilities were compromised by the signal disruption. But the M57 was purely mechanical, immune to electronic interference. Lieutenant Kazan noticed her movement away from the station. "Tech specialist, what are you doing?" "Sir, I have something that might work," she said, pulling out the launcher. Its weathered surface was a stark contrast to the sleek modern weapons malfunctioning around them. Old tech. No targeting computers. No network integration. The lieutenant looked skeptical, but desperate. His own tablet displayed nothing but error codes, and the command post had devolved into chaos as officers tried frantically to restore systems. "Try anything at this point," he said, turning back to the communications team. As she checked the weapon, memories flashed through Zahra's mind with crystalline clarity. Her grandfather showing her override techniques for mechanical jams. Nights spent secretly studying ballistics manuals when she should have been learning network architecture. Mornings practicing shoulder firing positions when no one was watching. Skills considered obsolete, knowledge deemed irrelevant in the age of automated warfare. She moved toward the ridge where soldiers had taken defensive positions, many looking at their malfunctioning weapons with expressions ranging from confusion to fear. These were men and women trained to fight alongside technology, not without it. Few had ever fired a weapon without targeting assistance or tactical network support. Sergeant Merrick spotted her approaching with the launcher. His face, already tense from the deteriorating situation, hardened further. "What the hell is this? Get back to your position," he barked. "The smart systems are down," Zahra replied calmly, continuing her approach. "But this will work. That museum junk? It is probably jammed from sitting in storage for 20 years. You will get yourself killed playing hero, and I do not have time to deal with another casualty." The lead tank fired, the shell landing 50 meters short of their position. A ranging shot. The next would be closer. "We need air support," someone shouted from further down the line. "Communications are still down," came the reply. "No way to call it in." Zahra ignored the chaos around her, kneeling at the ridge edge with a clear view of the advancing column. She examined the launcher carefully, finding the expected jam in the firing pin, exactly what she had been fixing that morning. With practiced movements, she removed the small tube of lubricant from her pocket and performed the manual override sequence her grandfather had taught her years ago. "Stand back," she ordered with unexpected authority, her voice cutting through the noise. Merrick turned, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief when he saw her preparing to fire. He laughed, a sharp sound edged with stress. "You do not give orders, specialist, and that thing is more likely to blow up in your face than hit anything." Zahra did not respond. Her focus narrowed to the task at hand, to the calculations running through her mind. Distance, wind speed, target movement, ballistic trajectory. No computer assistance, just physics and experience. She adjusted her position slightly, compensating for the launcher's known left drift at extended ranges. She fired. The rocket launched with a deafening roar, leaving a white smoke trail as it arced toward the valley. Time seemed to slow as all eyes followed its path. The desperate hope of the defenders focused on this single, improbable shot. The projectile struck the lead tank precisely where the armor joined the turret, its weakest point. The explosion was immediate and violent, the tank's ammunition cooking off in a secondary detonation that sent its turret spinning into the air. Flaming debris rained onto the second tank in the column, striking its fuel cells and triggering another explosion. The blast wave engulfed the third tank, rupturing its armored shell and igniting the ammunition stored inside. 3 tanks destroyed in seconds. Silence fell across the ridge as the echoes of the explosions faded. Every soldier stared at Zaira in disbelief, then at the inferno that had been an advancing armored column. Sergeant Merrick stood frozen, his mouth open but no words emerging, the mockery forgotten in the face of what he had just witnessed. A radio crackled to life somewhere down the line, the jamming signal disrupted by the electromagnetic pulse from the explosions. "Base to forward units, do you copy? Reinforcements are inbound." Zaira calmly reloaded the launcher, her movements practiced and efficient. Now that the enemy's element of surprise was lost and communications were partially restored, they had a fighting chance. But the armored column had been the vanguard of a larger force, and more vehicles would soon appear. "I can hit 2 more before they reorganize," she said matter-of-factly. "Someone should call in their coordinates." The stunned silence broke, replaced by renewed purpose. A communications officer relayed target information to the approaching air support. Soldiers adjusted their positions, finding confidence in the unexpected turn of events. Lieutenant Kazan moved to Zaira's side, kneeling to examine the launcher. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked quietly. Zaira lined up her next shot, tracking a distant vehicle through the launcher's simple optical sight. "My grandfather. He maintained weapons like this for the War Museum. Said someone should remember how they worked." The lieutenant nodded slowly. "When we get back to base, I want a full briefing on what other museum pieces might be useful, and I want you teaching others how to use them." Before Zaira could respond, movement appeared at the valley entrance, another armored vehicle moving cautiously after witnessing the destruction of its companions. She adjusted her aim, calculating the new variables. The shot would be more difficult, the target more aware. "Everyone down," she called. The order was obeyed instantly, even by those who had dismissed her earlier. Authority came from competence, not rank, and she had proven hers beyond question. She fired again, the launcher's recoil absorbed by her braced position. Another hit, another explosion. The remaining enemy forces retreated, unwilling to advance without armored support. Air support arrived minutes later, securing the area and allowing the operation to resume under modified parameters. As the immediate danger passed, Zaira found herself surrounded by soldiers who had questions about the launcher, about how she had known what to do when all their training had failed them. She answered simply, explaining the mechanical principles that operated independently of electronic systems. Sergeant Merrick approached last, his earlier confidence replaced by something approaching respect. "That was impressive shooting, Specialist. Where did you learn targeting calculations without a computer?" "Books," Zaira replied. "The same manuals your instructors used before targeting systems were automated. Physics does not change." The sergeant nodded slowly, processing implications that extended far beyond this single engagement. "I think we have all been too dependent on technology that can be compromised. When we return to base, things will need to change." Zaira simply nodded. She had been preparing for this moment her entire career, maintaining skills others had abandoned, preserving knowledge others had dismissed. Now that knowledge had saved lives and possibly the entire operation. But the real victory would come if the military recognized the vulnerability her actions had exposed. As night fell and the unit secured their position, Zaira cleaned the launcher by feel, her fingers finding each component with practiced ease. Tomorrow would bring questions, reports, probably recognition she had never sought. But tonight, sitting alone with the weapon that had changed everything, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Her grandfather had been right all along. Understanding the fundamentals meant you were never truly helpless. The mess hall hummed with conversation, but all focus centered on Zaira's table. Junior officers and enlisted personnel gathered around as she disassembled an old sidearm, explaining its mechanical principles with the same patience her grandfather had shown her. 3 days had passed since the battle at the Ridge, and word of her actions had spread throughout the base with the speed only military gossip could achieve. "See how the firing pin moves," she explained, holding up the component for the group to examine. "No electronics to jam, no software to hack, just metal against metal, controlled by spring tension." "But it is so primitive," a young corporal said, peering at the parts laid out on the table. His expression mixed fascination with disbelief, as though he were examining artifacts from another century. "Primitive kept you alive 3 days ago," Zaira replied without malice. Her tone was matter-of-fact, instructional rather than boastful. The enemy expected our technology to fail. They did not expect us to have alternatives. A technical sergeant from communications leaned forward. Could we retrofit some of our current systems with mechanical backups? Create hybrid weapons that work even under electronic warfare conditions? Before Zahra could answer, the room fell silent. The commander had entered, his presence immediately noticed despite his lack of announcement. Conversations paused mid-sentence as he approached Zahra's table and the crowd parted to create a path. "Specialist Kozlov," he said formally, hands clasped behind his back. The mess hall had never been so quiet, every ear straining to catch his words. "Effective immediately, you are being promoted to senior technical sergeant." Murmurs of approval spread through the room before the commander raised his hand for silence. "Furthermore, you are ordered to establish a new division, mechanical resilience training. Every soldier in this unit needs to know how to fight when the computers fail. You will have whatever resources you require." Zahra stood, surprised despite the rumors that had circulated since their return. "Sir, I only did what was necessary in the moment." "What was necessary," the commander repeated, "was knowledge we had collectively forgotten. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable. We forgot that. You reminded us." His voice carried across the silent room, ensuring every person present understood the significance of what had happened. "The after-action report lists 37 confirmed casualties averted by your action. That number would have been much higher if the enemy advance had continued unchecked." He extended his hand, offering a data pad containing her new orders and authorization codes. "Your first priority is creating a training program. Identify other personnel with mechanical aptitude, establish curriculum priorities, and requisition whatever vintage equipment you need from military storage." As the commander left, conversation exploded back to life, louder and more animated than before. Soldiers who had never spoken to Zahra approached to offer congratulations or ask questions about her new division. For someone who had spent her career in the background, the attention was uncomfortable but not unwelcome. Her knowledge finally had value in a system that had long dismissed it. Sergeant Merrick approached last, waiting until the crowd had thinned. His earlier swagger was absent, replaced by a more measured confidence. The hall watched their interaction with interest, aware of the history between them. "I was wrong," he said without preamble, extending his hand. "I am sorry." Zahra considered his hand for a moment, then shook it firmly. Their history of mockery and dismissal could not be erased by a single apology, but acknowledging error was a beginning. "Then help me teach them," she said. "Your tactical experience combined with mechanical knowledge would be valuable. The next battle will not be won by having the newest technology. It will be won by understanding the oldest." Merrick nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Consider me your first volunteer instructor. I still remember field stripping rifles during basic training, before the automated systems were standard issue. We can start there." As they discussed initial training priorities, Zahra realized how thoroughly the military had transformed in a single generation. Skills that had once been fundamental had become specialized knowledge, preserved by only a few. But that would change now. Her grandfather's lessons, once deemed obsolete, would find new life in a generation of soldiers who had never known a world without digital assistance. The military academy gleamed in the morning light, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the ancient weapons Zahra had arranged on the classroom walls. 1 year had passed since the battle at the Ridge, a year of building a program from scattered knowledge and forgotten manuals. Her uniform now bore the insignia of her division, a crossed wrench and rifle that symbolized the marriage of mechanical understanding and combat effectiveness. 20 cadets filed into the room, their expressions curious as they examined the displays. These were new recruits, their training now including mandatory courses in what military public affairs had branded resilient warfare, but which everyone simply called Kozlov's class. They had heard the stories, of course. The entire military had. But stories were one thing. Understanding was another. "Welcome to Mechanical Systems and Field Adaptation," Zahra began, standing beside the M57 launcher now mounted as a teaching tool on her desk. The same weapon that had changed military doctrine was now a centerpiece of education. "Technology evolves, but physics does not. That is the first principle you need to understand." She activated a holographic display showing the battle that had changed everything: the ridge, the valley, the 3 tanks. The cadets watched with rapt attention as the scenario unfolded, culminating in the shot that had become almost legendary within military circles. When everything went wrong during Operation Thunderclap, I did not rely on what was new. I relied on what I knew. She gestured to the launcher. This was not special because of what it was. It was special because I understood how it worked when nothing else did. For the next hour, she guided the cadets through the basic principles of mechanical weapon systems, emphasizing the physics that remained constant regardless of technological advancement. Unlike the instructors who taught network security or drone operations, she used no technical jargon, no complex interfaces, just metal, springs, and explosive propellant, governed by laws of motion that had remained unchanged for centuries. As the cadets filed out at the session's end, a young woman lingered behind. Her name badge identified her as Cadet Revez, her insignia marking her as top of her training cohort. "Sergeant Kozlov," she said hesitantly, "is it true what they say, that you took out 3 tanks with 1 shot from that launcher?" Zara smiled slightly. The story had grown in the telling, like all military legends. "The important part is not what I did," she replied. "It is what I knew before I needed to do it. Knowledge maintained when no one thinks it matters." She lifted the launcher from its mount and handed it to the cadet. "Field strip it, identify the common jam points, and tell me how to override them." Revez hesitated, then began working with careful precision. Her movements were tentative at first, then grew more confident as she located each component. Zara watched, recognizing the same focused attention she had once given to her grandfather's lessons. The cycle continued, knowledge preserved and passed forward. Through the classroom windows, Zara could see other training sessions across the base. Soldiers learning to navigate by stars instead of GPS, communications teams practicing Morse code, medics treating injuries without diagnostic scanners. What had begun as a single division had expanded into a comprehensive program that now influenced every aspect of military training. The newest weapons still dominated the battlefield, of course. Technology remained the primary advantage in modern warfare. But beneath the surface of that technology, a foundation of fundamental knowledge was being rebuilt, creating soldiers who understood the principles behind their tools. Hybrid systems now incorporated mechanical backups, and training emphasized adaptation when systems failed. Cadet Revez completed the field strip, laying out the components in perfect order. "Primary jam point is the firing pin," she recited. "Override requires manual lubrication and reset of the spring tension using the emergency access port. And if you do not have lubricant," Zara prompted, "improvise with available materials, water as a last resort, though it risks corrosion afterward." Zara nodded, satisfied. "Reassemble it." As the cadet worked, Zara considered how much had changed in a year. From a forgotten specialist maintaining obsolete equipment, she had become the architect of a new military philosophy. Her grandfather would have been proud, not of the recognition, but of the knowledge preserved. Outside, the sun was setting on another day of training. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adaptations. But whatever technological disruptions appeared on future battlefields, her soldiers would never be truly helpless. They would understand the fundamentals that technology often obscured, the constants beneath the innovation. The cadet completed reassembly, presenting the launcher for inspection. Zara checked each component, finding everything in proper order. "Well done," she said, returning the weapon to its mount. "Remember, in combat, you will not have time to think through each step. Practice until your hands remember what your mind might forget." "Yes, Sergeant," Revez replied with a sharp nod. "Thank you for the lesson." After the cadet left, Zara remained in the classroom, surrounded by the weapons her grandfather had taught her to maintain when everyone else had deemed them irrelevant. She ran her fingers along the launcher's weathered surface, feeling the small imperfections that told stories of battles past and future. The military had learned its lesson at significant cost. But because of that lesson, because of a single shot fired from a forgotten weapon by a specialist no one had taken seriously, they were stronger now, more resilient, better prepared for whatever came next. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of unexpected heroes resonates with you, consider subscribing for more untold military moments that changed everything.